Yo, 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 welcome to Candy Bee Knittin'. I'm Candy B. I be knitting. I hope you be knitting too. First, I want to talk about what I'm wearing today because this is probably going to become my uniform for the foreseeable future. This is the Cozy Corner Shawl by Stephen West. It's a it starts off with actually, I don't know where this one starts, but I'll just show you the gradient. And I was just in the mood for a big shawl blanket situation. It's getting cooler outside. I sit at my desk at work. The AC is sometimes booming, so I wanted something pretty carefree I could throw over the top. And it's by Stephen West, and it's from Knitting #1. And underneath that, I am wearing the Parachutey, also by Stephen West. And this one is from West Knits Best Knits, also #1. Oh, no, this is #2, the sweaters edition. And both of them are knit in Lion Brand's Shawl in a Ball. And you can see there's like this blue color happening, and then there's and that's the teal color, the healing teal colorway, and then there's these oranges and purples and greens and tans, the more variegated colors that are coming through, and that's the desert colorway, and I believe another Lion Brand discontinued yarn. But this one, I just wanted something that I could throw over anything and just be like, oh, I'm wearing my hand knit. You know, it's acrylic and cotton blend, so it's pretty comfy, but also low maintenance, but also makes it look like I'm a little bit fancier than usual because I'm wearing something hand knit. And this piece in particular, it's considered a top, and so you cast on one edge and you knit across this way, then you cast on for the back, knit down, and you're picking up stitches on the side here, and then you stop and do an I-cord on the bottom. What I did, because I had an excessive amount of Shawl in a Ball yarn, I just kept knitting in the round until I reached what is now knee length. You'll see finished pictures on my Instagram at Brulude. I'm not going to show you now because I got my podcast set up just the way I want it. But basically, a funny story. Every knitter, I'm sure, has this story. I have a friend. She's not able to crochet as much as she used to. She had all this yarn she wanted to get rid of, and so she posted in the group chat. And I'm like, oh, that blue looks nice. I've never used Shawl in a Ball. I just kind of want to try it out. I'll just take a ball of that blue. And you can probably guess she gave me literally 7 balls of, she gave me all of her Shawl in a Ball. And so it's 150 gram skeins, and that shawl took probably 2.5 skeins, and then the rest went into this tunic jumper situation. Just to give you an idea, size-wise, this is supposed to be an oversized fit, and this is the size medium in the pattern. I'm a size 38 chest, and I didn't want it too oversized. He has directions in the pattern about how to make it a dress, but making it a dress makes it that much wider too, and I just didn't want that extra fabric, so I kept it with the directions to make it a top, and I just added the bottom. And that brings us to our topic for today. In case you haven't noticed, my favorite knitwear designer is Mr. Stephen West. I've knitted probably 3 or 4 of his shawls at this point. Several hats. I've knitted several hats of the same pattern several times, which says a lot because I don't usually knit the same pattern twice. And obviously I've knitted this Parachutey, so I've knit probably 5 or 6 of his patterns at this point. And I love his aesthetic. I love the bright colors. Usually he posts things that are very much like heavy contrast colors, stitch designs that look complex but aren't that complex once you get the hang of it. So they're fun knits, but then when you're done, you have this piece that feels very artistic and very expressive, and not something that looks like I could just go to any old store and buy it, especially when you start mixing and matching colors. And I also like, I knitted these with inherited Shawl in a Ball from Lion brand. So they lend themselves well to all types of yarns. You don't have to go buy the expensive hand-dyed yarn. I like using scraps. I like using commercial yarn, and I like mixing and matching. And you do a lot of I-cord bind off, so I'll grab scraps from my stash and do the different I-cords in contrasting colors. And as Stephen West always says, say yes, don't stress. And so I just love that he's very laid back, but also very fun and expressive. And so, in case you haven't heard, I don't know how you would have heard of me, but not heard of Stephen West, but in case you haven't heard, he is about to kick off his 14th annual Mystery Knit Along, or MCAL. And what that is for the month of October, every week he comes out with a clue to a piece of a shawl, and you are to knit along with him, and you don't know what the whole shawl is going to look like until you get to the end of the 4 weeks. And I just kind of want to talk through like what I'm thinking about as far as whether or not I'm going to do it. When I first started knitting, and the first time I came across Stephen West patterns, I thought I could never knit anything like that. It looks way too hard. And then I knit, I believe the Slumber Shawl was my first shawl of his. And I had a blast with it. I was like, oh, this is what people mean when they say his patterns are fun. Like those two words, I enjoy knitting, but I had never heard someone say, oh, this is fun. And so I immediately clicked with something about him and something about his patterns. And I was like, oh, I can do this. I can do this. But the thing that made me hesitate was, one, a knit along just sounds very heavy to me. Like, oh, it's a month to knit a shawl, which I could technically do, but I followed along with a lot of other people I admire who are quite prolific knitters. And I'm just like, that looks like they get burnt out on it. You're knitting it, you make a mistake, you're trying to figure out what part comes next. And I've seen a lot of people get stressed out about it. I don't necessarily like being told what to knit and when. And the idea that for 1 month I am tied into this shawl, because it would take me, took me probably a good 6 to 8 weeks to knit a Stephen West shawl at my normal pace. And so that would be me knitting twice as fast and trying to keep up with the clues, and people get really stressed out about spoilers. And so I was just like, that just doesn't sound like a lot of fun. And the fact that it's a mystery, you don't know what you're going to make, and God forbid it's something you don't like. I have found that just looking back at his patterns, I have the West Knits Best Knits shawl book, and I enjoy most of the shawls in there. There are a couple that I'm just like, that's not my fave. I'll probably end up knitting it just because I own the book and I own the patterns. But for the most part, I groove on his patterns, and to me, it would be fun just to be a part of that community and part of that thing. A lot of people knit them and never wear them just because they like being a part of something fun. So approaching it, I was like, okay, maybe I'll do it. I could be open to this. But I do have some other hang-ups. I like using mostly yarn from Stash. I was just like, oh, I would do, I forget what the one last year was called, but it called for 4 skeins and it had to be 2 contrasting colors. And I was like, okay, I'll do it, but I need to find something I have in Stash. And I really didn't have anything that fit the bill last year. And so going into this year, I was just like, okay, if it fits, if it's in Stash, if I got a little extra time on my hands, I'll knit it. And this year he announced it's going to be a gradient, which, to be honest, bummed me out a little bit because I was kind of looking forward to, a lot of his patterns have been, high contrast, just grab whatever skeins you got, maybe mix a little mohair in there. And gradients are a very intentional color palette that I don't necessarily have readily available in my stash. The only yarn that I think would work is I have some Knit Picks palette yarn, but those come in 50 gram skeins. And being a mystery, I don't know how much of each color I would use, and if there's some space to mix and match where the colors land. And that's my other big issue too. I'm very intentional. Like this seems like, oh, I just got two multicolored balls, but I was very intentional about where I was like, oh, I want this light blue color on the front. The back is mostly the purples and the oranges. I'm very thoughtful when it comes to where I place my colors, and I have a lot of self-doubt in myself. Sometimes I get a lot of analysis paralysis where I'm just like, is this the right choice? I don't know. And putting a mystery on top of that where I don't necessarily know, oh, the dark blue is going to be in this pattern and the light blue is going to be in this pattern. It's a little difficult. The other thing is I was saying about you don't necessarily have to use great indie dyed yarn to knit his patterns, but with a gradient, it's pretty hard to find a true gradient in a lot of commercially available yarns. I literally was just saw someone today talking about how Knit Picks discontinued their stroll gradient packs, which were a really great bargain and available in various colors. But most like commercially available yarns, it's like maybe you have a light blue and a dark blue, but that true, transitioning from a pale blue to a navy gradient over 4 or 5 skeins, that's hard to come by at that price point. And so I don't know if I'm quite at the point in my Stephen West fandom where I want to drop $150 on a gradient kit for a shawl where I don't know what it's going to look like. That's a big, I like Stephen West. I don't know if I like Stephen West that much. My other thought too was, how slick would it be to have a gradient shawl, but on all natural wools, like a bright white wool to kind of a gray into the darker, more black sheep breeds. And that's something I would love to spend for. And quite frankly, you announced the MCAL in September. By October, I don't think I could do that, but maybe 2 or 3 years from now. And I'm not too partial about doing it 2 to 3 years from now, because I feel like eventually I am going to knit all of his patterns. So maybe next year I will, finally get all the yarn together to make a gradient. Or maybe I'll see the final product on Instagram and be like, actually, I think I'd rather, start on a slipstravaganza or something like that. Rather than this gradient one. But I do think that would be an awesome idea, and it's a shame I didn't have more time to put something like that together, because I was thinking I've gotten into a lot of hand spinning, and I have hand spun that would be suitable for a shawl, but once again, it doesn't fit the gradient piece of it. But then again, the pattern may come out and you may be like, oh, I can knit that in all solids. I don't know, but that's the magic of a knit along. So long story short, am I doing the Stephen West MCAL? Maybe. I have until October 1st to make up my mind. Next week I am going to a fiber festival, so maybe I'll see something that catches my eye. I have been going through my stash for other reasons, and I've come across single skeins that are solid colors that might fit the bill, but I have to, ideally I would take that one skein with me and hold it up in the yarn store and find 2 or 3 other colors that could go with that. We'll see. The knit along that I am doing for sure, Sarah Dawson, aka at the Black Sheep Knitter, is doing the hashtag Missed the Boat Cow. And so from September 1st through the end of the year, she is inviting people to knit a ranunculus. Ranunculus is a pattern by Midori Hirose. And once again, I don't know how you would have found me and not known what a ranunculus is, because I started knitting in 2020 and it was the #1 pattern in 2020 on Ravelry, and it still shows up in the What's Hot on Ravelry, and there's projects going all the way back to 2017. And so it's a heavy hitter in the knitting community. A lot of people are hesitant to knit one because it is so popular. That's the #1 reason I hear that people have not knit a ranunculus yet, is that, oh, everyone's knit a ranunculus. And so Sarah Dawson is, trying to reach out to people who have never knit one before and finally just do the thing. I actually have knit a ranunculus before, but I knit one probably over a year ago at this point. And to be honest with you, I feel like such a different knitter now, and my experience with it is, I have cast one on. My experience with it now is so different that it literally feels like a new pattern for me. When I first started knitting it, the only cast on I knew was just the simple knit cast on that you learn, and there's a cast on that starts this project that nearly made me give up on the whole project. I had never done lifted increases before. I had never done short rows before, and so it's almost like this final test for me as a knitter, and be like, okay, this is how far I've come. So I'm really excited to participate. And I'm going to close out by showing you how far I've gotten, because my plan is now, I want to knit at least 2 by the end of the year. I started my first one September 2nd, and I've pretty much made it through the yoke, and today is the 15th of September, and that's not knitting intensely every day. And that's why I'm a little bit more genial to this than the MCAL, because I have 4 months. I'm pacing myself, and I will finish with more than enough time. And it's a pattern that I'm kind of familiar with, that I actually, it's been on my list for a very long time to reknit, because I knitted that first one, had a questionable experience, ended up gifting it to my niece, and I was like, actually, I should make another one and have it for myself. And so I can finally say the words. Every knitter podcaster says, they're like, this is living in my such and such bag. I don't have those fancy knitting bags that like the designer indie shop bags. All of my knitting bags are tote bags that I've repurposed over the years, that I've just gotten from random places. But my husband went out last week and he bought me this bag. It's not particularly for knitting. He went, there's like a local tchotchke store he went to, and he saw it and thought of me, but you know what's going to go into it. It's going to be my knitting. And my current ranunculus is living in this bag. And like I said, I made it through the yoke. I did not do that cast on because I just remembered having such a bad experience with that cast on, so I just did a German twisted cast on, which brings it in a little bit more. It doesn't have that kind of off the shoulder feel that the pattern has. It's a top down circular yoke pattern, and I've finished the circular yoke, and then you go into it's like a lacy situation, and then you go into the raglan increases. And this yarn, talk about how I don't have any solid yarns in my stash. This is a variegated yarn, and this is sock yarn from Bumblebee Acres Farm, and that's going to be my first ranunculus for the season. And the thing that appeals to people about the ranunculus is that you can, for the most part, if you follow just the traditional vanilla pattern without any mods, you can get a whole one out of one skein of 400 yard per 100 gram sock yarn, because it is knit at such a wide gauge, and just the way that the different sizes are written. And so when I was talking about having a yarn stash versus having a yarn collection, it's great for those yarns that are in your collection. This colorway is called Calcifer, and if you don't know who Calcifer is, I hope your bacon burns. But I had to have it because of the name of the colorway, and I was just happy to have it. But now I have an actual project I can use it on. My next ranunculus is going to be another collection yarn. This is my Genderqueer Pride yarn from Fully Spun Yarn, and I got this as a souvenir when I was in DC for work. I got it from Looped Yarn Works, and I just, that's what I do. I go out and I buy single skeins of yarn, and this is a great project to use those. And then I was, looking further in my stash, and I was like, you know what I would love to have, because the original ranunculus, you just bind off, and you have like kind of like a cap sleeve, and it's got the kind of flare that a stockinette, just the flat stockinette has with no finishing on it. And I like to add just a nice ribbing for short sleeves. But there's also directions in the pattern to do long sleeves with more short rows, and you have like this nice little poofy sleeve. And I actually do have 2 skeins of lace weight yarn that I think I can hold together, and I can get a long sleeve version. And this is Jaeger spun silk and wool lace yarn, and it's a fuchsia color. But the funny thing about this is I pulled this out because I was like, oh, this would make a great ranunculus. But then I'm like, oh, I was saying I don't have a lot of solid skeins. So maybe when I go to my yarn festival, I can be on a lookout for wool silk blends that are in this color family. And maybe this could be the start of a Geogradient. And maybe like a light pink over here, a deeper purpley pink over here, and then like a deep rich purple down here, which I actually have a nice deep purple, but I think I have maybe 60 to 70 grams. I don't know if that's going to be enough for the darkest color, and I actually do have a light pink that might work with this, so I would need like a third color, I think, and maybe bind off early if the darkest color comes last, but we'll see. Y'all let me know. Are y'all doing the Geogradient cowl? What are your color templates? Are you looking for that true gradient? Or are you just picking colors kind of in the same family? Are you doing this hashtag miss the boat cowl? Today is September 15th, and Denise from Earth Tones Girl just announced her falling leaves sock cowl she does every year, and you just have to knit fall themed socks for the month. That should be a lot of fun. Hohi Locatelli has her annual knit along. The fall is jam-packed, and that's another reason I didn't want to get too wrapped up in knit alongs, because it's back to school. The holidays will be here before you know it. There's a million things that I want and need to knit, and so I don't want to get too hung up, but I will live vicariously through y'all. Please let me know what knit alongs y'all are doing. Drop the hashtags in the comments, and I hope you do all the YouTube things, like, subscribe, share with a friend, hit me up on Ko-fi, hit me up on Instagram at Rulude, send me an email, candibknittin@gmail.com. Until the next time I see you, I be knitting. I hope you be knitting too.